Hello and welcome to an overview of GCSE English Literature at NPCAT. At NPCAT, we follow the AQA English Literature GCSE course. This year, it's a little bit different. Due to the lockdown and school closures, AQA have removed the anthology poetry element from the course. This means that students will not have to answer an exam question on the power and conflict poetry. Instead, students will still sit 2 exams. On paper 1, students will answer a question on their 19th century prose novel. Students will have either studied A Christmas Carol or Jekyll and Hyde. You must only answer on the novel you have studied. On section B, students will then answer a question on their modern text. Students will have studied An Inspector Calls or Blood Brothers, and again, you must only answer one question on the text that you have studied. On paper 2, you will now answer on your Shakespeare text. You will have either studied Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth, and again it is really important just to answer the question on the text that you have studied. And then the final section will be on unseen poetry. Here you will be given 2 poems and you will be required to answer 2 questions. So let's have a little look then at your Shakespeare text and your 19th century novel. When you get into the exam, it's really important that you don't panic and end up writing an answer on the wrong text. There will be lots and lots of questions to choose from because across the country, students will have studied lots of different texts compared to you. So the first thing you need to do when you get into the exam is find the contents page, find the text that you have studied, highlight it and find the page number that you need to go to in order to find the right question. The questions for the 19th century novel and Shakespeare texts look very similar. In each case, you will be given an extract from the text and a question which will then focus on the extract and also require you to think about the rest of the text. For each question, you must answer both bullet points. One bullet point will focus on the extract, whilst the second bullet point will require you to think about the text as a whole. There are 30 marks available for this question, plus 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. It is really important that you make a good impression on the examiner by spelling Shakespeare correctly, by spelling character names correctly and using capital letters. Those 4 marks could make the difference between you getting a grade 3 or a grade 4. In the exam, it's really important to identify which part of the text the extract comes from. Is it from the beginning, the middle, or the end? Once you've identified which section of the text the extract is from, you can then use your prior knowledge to work out what might be happening in this extract. Don't panic if it's an extract that you have not studied in detail in lesson. You will still be able to use your knowledge of the characters and of the text to unpick and analyse the extract. Ask yourself what sort of presentation you would be expecting to see of the character at this moment in the text. For example, we know that Juliet at the beginning of the play is obedient and submissive, whereas by the end of the play she's determined and assertive, and we can use this prior knowledge to zoom in and unlock the extract that is being used in the exam. As you read through, start to look for any language or imagery or structural devices which will give you an insight into the character or theme that you've been. Some top tips for exam success. Read the information that is given to you in front of the extract to establish where in the text the extract comes from. Pay attention to the wording of the question. Look at the supporting bullet points and use keywords from the question to help keep your answer focused. As soon as you get into the exam and you've read the question, jot down your initial thoughts in response to the second bullet point. Which character or theme is it asking you about? Can you remember any other quotations from the rest of the play or text that would be helpful? And make a note of these now so that you don't forget them later on in the exam. Read the extract carefully at least once, annotate it, use your highlighter, and select at least 3 really powerful quotations that you will be able to use in your answer. For the second bullet point, this is where you'll be writing about the rest of the play, and it's really important to try and use some evidence from the rest of the text to support your points. However, lots of students can panic because they think, oh, I can't remember the right quotation to use. If you know the exact words of a quotation, that's brilliant. Use the quotation. If you think you know the words but you aren't sure, have a go. And if you can't remember the words or the quotation, just refer to that part of the text. For example, at the beginning of the play, Romeo is lovesick and naive. This would still count as a reference. Look for opportunities to make key points and use those key quotations that you've been revising. Just make sure that you link it to the key focus of the question. Finally, make sure you include some reference to the social context and writer's purpose. So think about what was going on at the time. What was Shakespeare's point in writing this play?
Macbeth is a play written during the Jacobean era, and contextually this is very important. At the time period, people believed in the divine right of kings, and this was the belief that the king or queen was chosen by God, and therefore to act against the monarch was a direct act against God. The play explores the conflict between religion and the supernatural. James I became King of England in 1603, uniting the English and Scottish throne. He had a fascination with the supernatural, writing many books on the topic, hence why the play includes many elements such as the witches. James I faced issues whilst King of England. During his reign, Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators attempted to blow up Parliament in an attempt to kill the king, hence why the play includes the act of regicide. The play also explores many universal ideas, one of them being ambition, another being power, treason, supernatural and loyalty. The play still resonates with modern audiences because these are still things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. A grade 9 idea that you could explore to develop your analysis further is the idea that Macbeth is a tragic play that allows Shakespeare to explore the ideology that ambition is corruptive. A key quotation from the play is taken from Act 5, Butcher and his fiend-like queen. King Malcolm describes Macbeth in this way at the end of the play, which is a direct contrast in how Macbeth is described in the beginning, since in the beginning he is described as brave and valiant. From this we can see that Macbeth is a tyrannical leader, and his ambition not only corrupts his personality, but results in him being a bad king. Macbeth is a tragic play written by the playwright Shakespeare. The play fits the conventions of a Greek tragedy outlined by Aristotle. In this sense, we have a tragic hero who starts off as brave but ends the play by being a butcher. We see his downward spiral due to his amartia, which is his ambition, and how he is corrupted by power. Shakespeare presents the audience with a world in chaos, in which order will only be restored after lesson is learned, and the tragic events unfold. The disruption in the play is due to the fact that Macbeth kills the king, and therefore his act of regicide disrupts the natural order. It's only through his death at the end of the play that catharsis can be received by the audience. Through the play we see the downward spiral of brave Macbeth. This allows Shakespeare to explore his key ideas of Jacobean England. In the play, Shakespeare explores the idea if Macbeth is ever truly in charge of his own destiny, or whether he is just a product of fate due to the influence of the witches. We also see the corruptive nature of the supernatural, and the fact that Macbeth aligns himself with the supernatural is one of the reasons why he spirals downwards. We also see the act of regicide in natural order. We see the fact that Macbeth is killed at the end of the play is punishment for going against the natural order and acts as a warning to others that may decide to commit the act of regicide. By setting the play in historic Scotland, Shakespeare is able to condemn the act of regicide, whilst also paying homage to the lineage of the new King James I. The play focuses on the corruption of ambition, specifically the destructive impact it has on Macbeth as a character and his relationship with those around him. For example, we see his relationship with his wife deteriorate as he becomes more paranoid, and we also see the impact his ambition has on his friendship with Banquo, since he murders his friend to protect his kingship. For Macbeth, his ambition leads to an increase in violence, as his fear over his kingship leads to his demise. Shakespeare uses the play to warn society about the consequences of going against the natural order and attempting to kill the king, probably in homage to James I and the events that occurred in 1605. Macbeth is a tragic hero, and his downward spiral is presented throughout the play. He begins the play as a brave hero and described by King Duncan as a valiant cousin. This emphasizes his power and how courageous he is, especially in battle. It is clear that at the beginning of the play Macbeth is loyal, and he is praised by the king and the other thanes. However, Macbeth's fatal flaw is his ambition. His desire to become king is first ignited after he meets the witches in Act 1, Scene 3. They tell him that he will be king hereafter, and after they leave, he says that murder is yet but fantastical. This illustrates how Macbeth is thinking about how he can become king, and the fact that he says that murder is fantastical shows that he already is thinking that murder might be the only way to become king and therefore achieve his desires. He is then manipulated by his wife to kill King Duncan, but it's clear that his desire is already there. He asks the witches to steer you imperfect speakers, showing us that Macbeth acknowledges that the witches aren't to be trusted. However, his ambition has already been ignited, so he ignores the warning signs. Macbeth's act of regicide begins his downward spiral, since once he becomes king, he is forced to kill and murder to protect his throne. He says that he is in blood, stepped in so far that should I wait no more. This shows us how Macbeth understands that he can't stop his bloody reign. This is because the only way he feels he can keep power is to kill those that are a threat to him. Through Macbeth, Shakespeare explores his ideas about fate and destiny, encouraging the audience to question whether Macbeth causes his own downfall or is just a victim of fate. At the end of the play, he is described as a butcher, and we are told that his wife is a fiend. This illustrates his tyrannical leadership. The fact that Macbeth was a terrible king is due to the fact that he goes against the natural order, and his act of regicide is a direct act against God, due to the fact that God chose the monarch, and this is what is believed at the time period due to the divine right of kings. Macbeth also says that my mind is full of scorpions. This illustrates his internal conflict, and the internal conflict he feels throughout the play. His internal conflict is created by the fact that he is paranoid about being king and views everyone as a threat. Lady Macbeth is an important character, and her progression throughout the play is significant. Lady Macbeth begins the play as a woman that subverts stereotypical gender roles. We see this in her speech following the letter she receives from Macbeth. She asks for the supernatural elements to unsex me here, showing how she is willing to give up everything that makes her a woman in order to help her husband achieve his goal of being king. She starts her speech with the raven and his horse, the raven signifying the death of King Duncan, and the fact that she uses language such as battlements and entrance show how she is a warrior and she has power and strength. As the play progresses, though, Macbeth's role changes, and so does Lady Macbeth's. Macbeth becomes more dominant in their relationship, so therefore Lady Macbeth becomes more submissive. Macbeth actually tells her to be innocent of the knowledge Davies took when he is plotting the death of Banquo. This is his attempt to protect his wife, but also it could show that she no longer has control over him, since Macbeth chooses to act without her influence. Lady Macbeth confirms the traditional gender roles at the end of the play. She becomes completely overwhelmed with guilt, and she shows remorse for her actions, something she did not do in the beginning of the play. In Act 5, we see her wash her hands, and she says, "Out damn spot." This is a manifestation of the blood that she has on her hands after she planted the dagger. She also has blood on her hands because she not only helps after King Duncan has been killed, but she also was the one that plotted the murder in the first place. Following the death of King Duncan, she says to Macbeth, "My hands are of your colour." This literally reflects the fact that she planted the daggers and she is now covered in blood, but it's also a metaphor for her role in the play. Her hands are of the same colour as Macbeth because she has as much guilt as him, since it was her plan to kill the king. We are now going to look at some of the other key characters in Macbeth. Malcolm is the rightful heir to the throne, and at the end of the play becomes king. He says it's by the grace of grace, showing how he aligns himself with religion, where Macbeth aligned himself with the supernatural. Banquo is also significant, since Banquo receives a prophecy at the same time as Macbeth. Banquo is told that his children will be kings, but he worries that Macbeth plays most foully for the kingship. He is therefore suspicious of Macbeth, hence why Macbeth kills his friend. Macduff is a direct contrast to Macbeth. Where Macbeth is selfish, Macduff sacrifices everything in order to protect Scotland. The witches create mystery throughout the play, and it's their alignment with the supernatural that acts as a warning to all those that will want to align themselves with the supernatural. Their words and deeds do not match, and therefore this leads to Macbeth's downfall, since he takes their words at face value and does not realise that they are filled with lies. Lady Macduff is murdered by Macbeth due to the fact that he wants to kill Macduff's family to warn others against going against him. Fleance is also significant, since Fleance is Banquo's son and therefore a potential king. The fact that he flees and is able to escape Scotland implies that maybe he will be king one day. King Duncan is significant because he is the good king of Scotland. He is meek and is described by Macbeth with positive language. This therefore shows how his death is unjustifiable and therefore causes the disruption to the natural order.
Now we'll move on to look at your 19th century novel, A Christmas Carol. Some key points about the context of Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in the 19th century, and it's set in the Victorian era. Remember that this was a time just after the Industrial Revolution, where thousands of people had flocked to the cities to work in the factories. And there was a huge disparity or gap between the rich and the poor. The rich were very, very rich, whilst the poor were very, very poor. Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in order to convey a stark political message. It's what we call a morality tale. Dickens wanted his readers to take notice of the problems and suffering within society. He wanted his readers to become more charitable, kind and forgiving, and to look after the most vulnerable within society. His aim was to haunt the reader pleasantly, whilst also conveying a serious message about the inequality within society. The novel charts the protagonist Scrooge's journey to redemption. In Scrooge, Dickens creates a character who is so awful and so mean and kind and cruel. And his point in doing this is to suggest that if even the worst character, Scrooge, can change for the better, then we all can. He uses incredibly emotive language and imagery, and the reason that Dickens does this is to really tug at the heartstrings of his readers. He wanted to have an emotional impact on his readers because he wanted his text to yield profound social consequences. He wanted a more equal society. Each of the characters within the novel helps Scrooge on his journey to redemption. And they all help to change him from his state as a misanthropic miser at the beginning of the novel to a benevolent, kind benefactor. Now let's have a look at revising your modern text. For your modern text, you will be given a choice of 2 questions in the exam. You'll have 45 minutes to answer this question, and you must answer only one of the two questions available. Read them carefully, look at the keywords before you make your decision. Some key tips here for inspector calls. It's really important to try to use keywords from the question throughout your answer. It's also important to try to use quotations to support any points you make about the play. If you know the exact words, use them. If you're a little bit unsure, still write down the quotation anyway. And if you can't remember any quotations, make sure you still refer to key points within the text. Top tip here, write down any key quotations you can remember at the start of the exam. This will help to take the pressure off later on when you are struggling to remember key points and key quotations. Always start with an introduction. Remember your grade 9 introductions, which you will have been working on in class. End your essay with a conclusion which draws your answer together. If possible, try to develop multiple interpretations of quotations. Use words like "this might suggest" or "perhaps". This will help to impress the examiner and give you extra marks in the exam. Priestley was a socialist. Like Dickens, he was very concerned about the consequences of social inequality in Britain, and he was concerned about the class divide. Priestley wanted his audience to think Mr. Burling is a fool. By rejecting the attitudes held by Mr. Burling, Priestley believed his audience could lead a better life. Throughout the play, Priestley portrays the evil side of money and capitalism. Some key staging points to remember. The lighting at the beginning of the play is pink and intimate. It becomes brighter and harder once Inspector Goole arrives. This signifies that Inspector Goole will put the Burling family under pressure. Dramatic irony is used throughout to undermine the character of Mr. Burling. In Mr. Burling and Goole, we have representations of the different attitudes in which society operates, and the audience is encouraged to side with Goole. The play is about more than the suicide of Eva Smith. She represents the lower classes who were so badly treated at the time. Priestley's final message is about looking after one another, taking responsibility for the weaker and more vulnerable members of society. And in that sense, we can say that the play is still very relevant today. If we look at what is going on around us in the world, Priestley's message is still incredibly important. Finally, let's look at the last part of the English literature exam, which is the unseen poetry element. In this part of the exam, students will be given 2 poems to read and analyse. These will be poems that they will not have studied in class. There are 2 questions in this section. In the first question, students will have 30 minutes to read and analyse a poem. Students must explore how the poet presents their feelings through the use of language, imagery and structure. In the second part of the exam, students will be given another poem to read. They will then be asked to compare the first unseen poem with the second unseen poem. This question is only worth 8 marks. Therefore, students should spend no longer than 15 minutes answering this question. In order to prepare for this part of the exam, students should still try to read as much poetry as possible in order to support the unseen element of this exam. Students can follow a very basic structure when answering this part of the exam, and then there is no need to write any more than 2 paragraphs. Finally, here are 3 top tips which will help you to be successful in your GCSE English Literature exam. Top tip number 1, learn your key quotations. Your teacher will have provided you with a bank of key quotations to learn and use in any exam. It's really important that you support your work in school by revising these key quotations at home. Create flashcards and test yourself regularly. Quotemaster is a really good free app that you can download to your phone, which helps you to remember key quotations. As well as remembering the quotation, make sure you understand why the quotation is important. Which themes does it link to? Which characters does it link to? And can you identify the AO2 methods that the author uses within the quotation? It's not enough to just simply remember your key quotations. You have to be able to do something with these quotations in the exam. It's really important to remember to use the Peel structure. Make a point, support your point with some evidence, a key quotation, and then really go to town explaining the effect of your key quotation. Remember to zoom in on the techniques and the words within the quotation, and think about what the writer is trying to convey with the quotation and what effect it has on the reader. Try to use some really sophisticated words within your analysis. Remember that key word perhaps. That word perhaps will help you to develop multiple layers of interpretation of the quotation. And again, this will help you to really get the top grades in your literature exam. Top tip number 3, write and learn a grade 9 introduction. Often the hardest part of an exam can be getting started and putting pen to paper. One way around that is to pre-prepare a really impressive grade 9 standard introduction for every text that you've studied. This means that when you get into the exam, all you will need to do is remember your grade 9 introduction and begin your essay with that paragraph. Your teacher will support you to write a grade 9 introduction in your lessons. You will then need to use your flashcards and time at home to revise and learn your grade 9 introduction. As well as the extra support and intervention available in school, there are also a number of online revision materials that you can use to support your revision of English literature. Make sure that you are following us on Instagram, npcat_English, where we regularly post revision tips and ideas to support you as you prepare for your exams. In addition to this, you can find a wealth of online teaching and learning materials on our NPCAT website. Go to Education and select Online Teaching and Learning.
All Year 11 pupils have a login for Tassamy. On Tassamy you can revise English, Maths and Science. Tassamy will allow you to revise the key literature texts that we are studying this year, and it will not only ask you questions about the text that we are studying in class that term, but also the other set texts, allowing you to develop your knowledge and deepen your understanding. Don't forget Year 11 that English enrichment happens every Wednesday at 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. In enrichment, we will be addressing any deficits that we identify from your classwork and your exam, and we will be closing all gaps. You're also going to be receiving some study guides from the school. The Snap Revision study guides for English literature break the text down into manageable chunks. They look at key moments and key characters, helping you to develop your knowledge and ensuring that you fully understand the texts and the characters in them. The revision guide for reading also allows you to focus on the language papers. This allows you to focus on key deficits, such as language paper 1, question 3. The revision guide for writing will allow you to focus on question 5 and develop your skills further.